Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Today, we're going to cover this video that was sent to me. I'm just shouting her out by Emily. Thank you so much. I want to see what he has to say and give my response as an ex-fat. So I'm going to call myself in this video, but at my highest, I was 383. And I'm currently 222, so take that with what you will, and we will get it started. Let's go.
You can be forgiven for thinking that when it comes to the fat acceptance movement, parts of our society have lost their minds. And I'm not talking about obese people in denial or fat influencers spouting nonsense. I'm talking about those who should know better. The media features obese people in sports magazines, or people being told this is healthy. We're told that they're strong and fit and that silly claims like them being anorexic are actually serious. Doctors avoid the word obese to not offend patients, and medical schools bend science to find metabolically healthy obesity.
Yeah, so I have definitely noticed this trend a lot. I don't really know. I'm going to be honest. I don't know for sure why this is such a thing. I feel like people, for whatever reason, in the United States especially, are very against the truth or like hearing truth. There is a tendency when something is said that is true, people immediately deny, and if something is a lie, people will readily accept it. I see this all the time with like money. It's huge. People will say they're broke. They're not broke. But if they're actually broke, people will say, oh my gosh, you're not actually broke. Stop saying that. If they're not actually broke and they say they're broke, then they'll say, oh, I'm so sorry. Da, da, da. I get you. It's very bizarre. It's the same thing with like, I feel ugly or I'm pretty or whatever. It has to do with these certain, I don't know if it's status orientation or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but it happens all the time. And people will constantly gas each other up when something isn't true, and then at times borderline gaslight when something is true. It's something that I've noticed a lot just throughout my entire life, and I've always hated it. It's probably one of my least favorite things about American culture. I don't know if it's now, metastasized to other places, but it's something I noticed and I remembered as far back as the 90s in my life. But again, I was in California, so I don't know if California was like ahead of its time or whatever, but I think it comes from a desire to be nice or a desire to make everything equal or create an even playing field, like these types of ideas. But it doesn't actually do that. It creates a lot of problems. And then it also can cheapen the actual struggles of people, like, for example, that are impoverished. I still haven't watched Whitney's video, but there was another YouTuber that reacted to one of my videos. I still haven't watched it. I'm still a pussy. But I did see one of the comments that was saying that, well, when I made $40,000 a year, I was struggling to make my $1,700 rent, and I still feel poor. I still felt like I was impoverished. And it's like, poverty is under $17,000 for a single person. You don't have no option of $1,700 rent. That's not even a question in your mind if you are actually impoverished. And it's really insulting when people do that type of thing, but it's a constant thing. And I notice with a lot of different stuff. I've given you guys a lot of examples, and fatness is such a huge one. And we're talking about general population here, which this is interesting because usually I'm talking about the toxic ritualistic world or people that have E fall by the letter D, but we're talking about just the general public. That's how people are. You're not impoverished at 40K. You're not. You're just not rich. So I don't know if there's this black and white orientation too, right? You can't ever just be mid. I don't know. It's very weird. It's very, very bizarre. It really bothers me. I'm just going to be honest. It really, really bothers me.
At supposedly intellectual TED Talks tell us things like this.
It also speaks.
So she's probably toxic ritualistic. So she's going to have weird views that are not realistic. But the fact that her views are uplifted, that does touch upon that weird American ideal of, I don't know, dancing around the truth. I don't know what to call it. I need to think of a term for it.
To the panic, the literal terror that the fear of fat can evoke. It is this fear that's feeding the diet industry, which is keeping so many of us from making peace with our own bodies.
We have more scientific information at our fingertips than at any point in human history. So how did we get here? That's a fascinating question that I just couldn't get out of my mind. Hey, I'm Ken LaCourte. I do my best to give you a balanced look at these uncomfortable topics. In this space, we have two extremes. First is the fat activist, who don't just demand people treat them kindly, but insist that people can be healthy at any size. Now, to me, that's like...
So they're often toxically ritualistic. They're not viewing the world realistically. They are delusional, legitimately delusional, which I think that that's another thing within American culture. People have a really hard time understanding that there are certain mental illnesses that make people actually delusional. Like, they are not in reality. They're not thinking clearly, legitimately not thinking clearly or rationally, like actually insane, basically. There are a lot of conditions like that, and Eve followed by the letter D is one of them. People that are within these issues are delusional. They are having a break with reality. They are not living in reality. And I think that that can be very uncomfortable for the general public to actually like accept and really internalize, because again, there's that idea of fairness, of like everybody's perspective is their own truth or whatever. That idea, it doesn't fly with E followed by the letter D at all, because it's not the truth. It's not truth, period. It's delusion. And so when you're encouraging somebody down that path, which is really common, which you see, that's what he is experiencing, or what he's observing, is the general public really shrining this idea of your truth within the toxic ritualistic. He's like, what the hell is going on? But it really is a problem. You know, it's a cultural issue in a lot of ways, in a lot of different aspects. You know, you can't feel like, maybe you can feel poor, but it doesn't mean that you're actually poor. You know? It's like, we need to really stop this, I think, in general, because it cheapens what people actually go through, and it clouds discussions. It does it creates a lot of problems. I'll put it to you that way. It creates huge, huge issues. And this whole toxic ritualistic aspect is a big one. This is a very big one.
Claiming the earth is flat, and I just don't see much point in arguing about it. On the other side, there's a cottage industry mocking those ridiculous claims and mocking the people who make them. They get millions of views on YouTube. And, you know, I get it. It's kind of fun. But to me, it feels like throwing shit at the village idiot. And
it's not exactly mocking. It's dismantling. It's argumentation. It's a lot of these kind of things. And it's also helping people get out of it, too. I don't like the way he portrayed anti-FA. There are people that are comedic within anti-FA, but at their core, typically there's somebody who has downsized, who has been there, and who understands that these toxic ritualistic concepts must be mocked. It's about mocking the ideas most of the time, not with every single person within anti-FA, or making anti-FA videos, but typically it is about the ideas, not the person. Sometimes it can be personal, I will admit. I try to admit it when it is personal for me. And I don't mind naming names. Like, I really personally can't stand the jock scientist, and I really cannot stand William, for example. Those are two just off the bat that it is a little bit personal for me, if I'm going to be honest. But most people, it isn't personal. It's more so about the ideas. And so I think that we have to, like, that needs to be acknowledged, that that's typically what's occurring. I'm like a weird one that will actually say if I personally don't like somebody, but usually people will not say that because it's about the ideas. And even for me, it's mostly about the ideas. It's just, these things have to be argued against, essentially. And it's a lot of people that watch it. People get millions of views doing it because people are watching it for motivation, also to wake up and to get out of these mindsets, which is incredibly important. And if fat positivity is going to be online, then anti-FA also needs to be online too. Because if there's no pushback whatsoever, which, to be honest, fat acceptance has way more institutional power than anti-FA, which I think as an activist is a huge issue, and I'm going to keep pointing that out, you can see the balance going to whole other levels. And I also think that part of being an anti-FA, in my opinion, is also arguing against the opposite extremes and understanding that the two sides of this pendulum are the same coin, basically. They're the same thing, just reversed. And it can get extreme in both directions. So I would argue from an anti-FA perspective that somebody should be arguing against overly reductive stuff as well, because if that were to become mainstream, then it will always swing back. And also, too, it encourages reinforcement within the toxic ritualistic, because people that are BINGing will use overly reductive content to spur about their, behaviors. So I think that it's important to consider all those things.
It's something we shouldn't really be doing. Instead, I dove into how a fringe movement, often with deadly advice, became mainstream enough to influence the media, medicine, and education. And I want to share that with you. We'll look into the psychological basis of why it's so powerful to overweight people, how the movement began, its explosive growth, and a look at its ugly extremes. In a real sense, this movement started inside the minds and the pain of overweight people who don't want to be that way. Now, I've been overweight.
It started within the toxic ritualistic. It started with people that have EFOB and the letter D. Essentially, that's the roots of it. I don't care what they say. That is what it actually came from, which I'm doing my best to expose on this channel, that is exactly where it came from. That's why all these ideas are so bizarre. They're so pernicious. It's because people have these DIS orders and they reinforce it into each other. And they use the internet to do it. And before that, they still did it. It's like the high school girl bathrooms of the 80s was a place where it would be reinforced in each other. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's happened before the internet. These things have been around before the internet. But that's where we're seeing it just explode, basically, or become, I don't know, much more sophisticated in a way. Like, you can get reinforcement for your DIS order just sitting at home now, for example. And that does have to be fought against. There has to be non-reinforcement or content that is counteracting that too, which is what I try to do on this channel a lot.
Messes with your brain. You need to deal with physical cravings that everyone has. We all get hungry and we all need to eat. But for heavy people, it's easy to overdo it. They get a lot of pleasure from food, pleasure that quickly turns into guilt and self-loathing. It can be an ugly.
So that is a cycle, which it's within a DIS order, if that's what he's talking about specifically. The other two causes of fatness that we discuss often are hormonal disruptions, so hormonal issues, anything from PCOS to even like ADHD, low dopamine, that can cause weight gain. And the last one is neglect, not caring about yourself, not caring about yourself or your kids. That's another way that it happens, but that typically doesn't get to this level. This level, in my opinion, is almost always deeply toxically ritualistic. You tend to see people have very deep childhood trauma very often when you watch these kind of shows. That's not coincidental.
Ugly cycle that hurts your self-esteem, something that more food can make you temporarily forget. It's also a failure that's very public in a way that other bad habits aren't. You can procrastinate or play too many video games, and few people will ever notice. But being overweight is something that you and everyone in your life sees every day. You can layer on top of that the fact that they're often just treated worse than thin people. Ask any friend who's...
People don't like it when I say this, but it goes both ways. So oftentimes when people are bigger, they also treat other people worse too. So it kind of goes both ways very often. I think that there is a stereotype of a super people pleaser, super nice, funny, fat friend, but I don't know if that's really reality. I think the reality of it is the fat friend that is very sensitive, uppity, reactive, annoying, a drag to be around. I'm gonna be brutally honest, and maybe there are fat friends that are doormats too, but that's also, it's still kind of dishonest, basically. So I'm just saying, like, I'm sure that there are extremely charismatic fat people that are very friendly and sweet and wonderful, but they're probably treated pretty well, is what I'm trying to say. I think a lot of times people that say that, they're usually shy, and a very shy person, you might not be treated that much better because, again, that kind of goes back to American culture too, where extroversion is really, really celebrated in America. And introversion, especially in the past few, not really now, but introversion's kind of having a moment right now, which is really weird as an introvert, by the way. It's super weird. But like if we're looking at the 2000s and prior, it was not it to be introverted. It was like, actually, it was so bad. It was almost like a slur. So I think a lot of people have that memory in their 30s now. And a lot of people that are really big and toxically ritualistic, they project their teenage experiences onto the present moment. So they'll say, like, I'm treated bad. But, it can be kind of muddied. So I just think it's often exaggerated. Where I think it might not be exaggerated is if somebody is very, very, very big. So if they're like 600 pounds or something like that, then I do believe that that person will experience a lot more issues just because it's so unusual, basically. I don't know how else to say it.
Who's been both. But to be told by people that you're fine as you are, that's a seductive idea. It goes even deeper than losing weight because we're also social animals, hardwired to seek acceptance. The body positivity movement offers that in spades. It's not just saying you're okay, it's saying you're also part of a community, a movement. Studies show that social rejection activates the same area of the brain as physical pain. So when society rejects you for your size and then a movement comes along saying, we accept you, we love you, that's like a balm for your brain. In America, 42...
I think it can be hard too because if people don't have, a lot of times in anti-FA spaces or, it's gotten better. It has gotten better. But in the past, especially, there really wasn't any emotional help within this issue. It was very just like, it can be either totally logical or cold or even really harsh or shaming, which harsh and shaming, it really isn't going to help somebody in the issue whatsoever. Very cold. When it comes to the toxic ritualistic ideas, yes, you want to be cold as hell. Very cold. But when it comes to the person, I still think that there has to be some kind of emotional understanding of the issue. And there are a lot of people who are more emotional, that are overweight or obese or have toxic ritualistic issues, and that also has to be addressed. And I try to do that on this channel, which at first I did get a lot of criticism for, honestly, because it was different. Because it's like, why are you doing this? Why are you talking about this? Why are you categorizing things this way? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? I get these types of comments. Why are you using their terms? Why are you doing this? Because I'm always thinking about the person in the issue. You know, I might not be the one to get them out of the issue, but once some nicey nice person has gotten them out, I'm step 2, and we get to the real nitty gritty here. And you're going to deal with this, you know, or I'm going to do my best to give you an emotional lane to get out of this, because that's what I needed when I was younger. I didn't have that. I didn't have an emotional lane to go down. It's important. And when we don't provide that, then the only ones are fat activists, because they do provide an emotional lane. They do. So I made sure that I'm like, I'm going to do it. I don't care what other people say. I'm going to do it because I know that it's lacking here, and I do the best I can. And we'll see, you know, we've seen how I've done. We'll see how it continues to go. But at the end of the day, that's why I do what I do, because they can't be the only ones that offer some kind of emotional advice or emotional guidance. There has to be others. Okay?
2% of people here are considered obese. And that's on top of an additional 30% who are considered overweight. That's a lot of people looking for comfort. As a movement, like a lot of others in the United States, the fat activists got more organized in the late 60s. In 1967, 500 people gathered in New York Central Park for a fat-in, organized by an overweight radio announcer. They ate ice cream, they waved protest signs, and burned diet books and photos of Twiggy, who was a popular super-thin model. Organizations were formed, including the more militant fat underground of the 1970s.
We demand good health care. I hate it when I go to doctors and
They sound exactly the same, don't they? It's because it's toxic ritualistic, so it doesn't matter how much the world changes or how much things shift. They're going to say the same things over and over again. 1 second, I have to cough. They're going to just keep doing it. So
I blame all my symptoms on my fat.
Those groups really didn't make too many waves, and it wasn't until about another...
So a lot of times when people say things like that, they're trying to get attention. So that's a way of getting attention, in my opinion. I think if people say that today, I think you need to acknowledge that a lot of people are having issues at the doctor, or a lot of people are having issues being listened to. I think it's more of an institutional issue in general, which sucks. And maybe that was still the case back then, but it doesn't matter. I don't really know. I wasn't there. I'm just talking about the present moment. I think it's stupid to say, I am not seen as well by a doctor because I'm fat, when most people are struggling to be understood, you know, or a lot of people are struggling at this time. It's not just a fat issue. It's just an issue, which again, probably would be totally supportive of somebody pushing for some kind of reform or for things to get better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, I can't get behind somebody who's talking about we should all be super morbidly obese. I can't get behind that, and so I won't.
The 30 years, around 2010, when things started to catch fire again. That was when the anti-bullying campaigns were sweeping the nation.
So there was still fat acceptance in the 2000s as well, but it was more cultural. It wasn't as much like institutional, which that might be what he's seeing. But typically, cultural shifts happen before institutional shifts. And so I noticed a lot of, well, you're fine just the way you are in the 2000s. Yes, there were people that were super thin or whatever, but there were also a lot of people, common people, that were like, it's not a big deal as long as you're healthy, blah, blah, blah. Like, I remember I went to the doctor, I think in the late 2000s, and they were like, well, as long as you're healthy, you know, stuff like that. So that's still like getting a little bit institutional. Yes, I was in California. I don't know if that matters, but you think, you know, California is one of the most fat phobic places, right? So I'm just saying, we have to think about, there were cultural shifts that were already occurring. I saw a lot of that in the 2000s, but it was still more of like a cultural battle that unfortunately fat acceptance won, basically. And then when you get to the 2010s, then you have corporate, institutional, university, right? Like all these things in the 2010s. It became a huge institutional push, and it still has a huge amount of institutional power today, although it's starting to lose corporate sway, and in some ways it's starting to lose the media in the United States a little bit, but I think it's still really strong in universities.
2010 study found that obese kids were 65% more likely to be bullied than classmates of normal weight. Suddenly, there were hard numbers behind the harsh treatment that fat kids face, and fat acceptance groups pounced. They framed weight stigma as a form of bullying that was destroying innocent children. Child advocacy toolkits.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Shift the focus from the war on childhood obesity.
See, I didn't remember this as much at the time. I do remember like I think like Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign or something like that. I remember there were a lot of like movement campaigns like on Nickelodeon and stuff. I don't know if that was in the 2000s, so it might have been. But that's the kind of stuff that I remember growing up during that time. I don't necessarily remember these like advocacy groups, but I do remember, particularly in the early 2010s, like I heard for the first time in one of my high school classes by a teacher that Barbie is bad for little girls to play with because the doll creates body image issues. And I was like, what? You know, like I remember hearing that and I was like, what the hell? Why is my teacher saying this? You know, that sounds really weird. And so I know it definitely was. So maybe that's what this was coming from. Weird.
To a health-centered focus embracing children of all sizes. They wanted to stop people from focusing on weight for the more nebulous idea of health. By painting fat kids as victims of persecution, fat activists successfully tapped into the culture at the time. People recognized bullying as a serious issue, and their hearts went out to torment.
Well, that's what fat activists always do. They always try to capitalize on a moment. So they always use the politics of the moment, the cultural conversation of the moment, to push the toxic ritualistic. So if bullying kids was the big trend in the early 2010s, then of course they're going to use that. Just like they used race in 2020, they were using, womanhood or women's rights in 2023, in 2024, and then now I don't know what the hell it is now. Now all I'm seeing is like, I think they're kind of lost right now. This is a very weird time, I think, I think it's just a confusing time for most media people. They don't know what to do. That's the vibe that I get from a lot of media. So now they're just being like, we had it so good before this year. And I'm like, what? I'm like, then why were you complaining so much before this year? You know, it's really weird. So it's almost like a complete gaslighting campaign right now where it's like, it was so amazing before 2025. Now it's horrible. And it's like, I don't think so. Like, you know, I was fat prior to 2025. Like, it wasn't that great. I was fat for many years. It wasn't that great. I'm not seeing it. So that's what I see now. I didn't know where they were going to go. A lot of you guys in my audience were thinking they were going to be like it's oligarchy to lose weight or something, but it didn't stick. So I think they're having a hard time finding something, like the next thing, you know? And that might be part of why it's not doing well, to be honest, because they don't have something like that to rally behind or to astroturf or whatever. So all I'm seeing is a lot of it was great before, now it's horrible, which is bizarre. So that's what I'm seeing.
Schools implemented zero-tolerance anti-bullying policies, and the argument that fat people were an oppressed class struck a chord. But the fat acceptance movement became about much more than protecting kids on the playground. Activists argued that the real threat to fat people's health wasn't their weight, but the discrimination they experienced. Essentially, they argued that their stress was even more unhealthy than their weight. It spawned the health at every size
It's bullshit. Just have to say that.
movement that tries to overturn the notion that thinness equals health.
You can be alone, never around other people. You're still going to be so unhealthy. It doesn't matter. You're never going to win. You're never going to find a way to make it work. Honestly, when you're super morbidly obese, the social aspects of weight are the least of your problems. I will be so real about that. If you're like a mid-sized princess, I can see it. There's a lot of social issues in the mid-size phase or being mid-sized. There's a lot of issues with it. It's hard socially. Even small fat, it's very difficult socially, but the other ones, oh honey, when you get past that, you have a lot of physical issues. So it's the least of your worries. You start to wish for a day when all you care about is the social side of fatness because it's a nightmare situation.
Cards patients could hand their doctors, asking that they not be weighed unless it's really medically
You fall by letter D.
necessary. Other websites have doctor's office survival kits and video workshops on dealing with fat phobia at the doctor's office. These practitioners say they use a weight-neutral approach, but that approach isn't neutral at all. Not mentioning a serious factor in a patient's health is kind of a big deal. But besides the nation's anti-bullying sentiment around that time, the decade from 2010 to 2020 coincided with an explosion of social media.
That's true.
Instagram came online, and then TikTok a few years later. Algorithms help build movements because once you're in, they'll fill your feed with like-minded content. They also find and define large audiences. The body-positive hashtags amassed millions of posts and billions of views. That means fame, and where there's fame, dollar signs follow, and that creates explosive growth. Celebrities and influencers jumped on the bandwagon, amplifying the message to millions. Lizzo was the most prominent, with her 12 million Instagram followers. She became one of the movement's biggest stars. Influencer Tess Holliday, with over 2 million Instagram followers, isn't just posting selfies. She's selling a lifestyle. Her book, The Not-So-Subtle Art of Being a Fat Girl, became an instant bestseller in 2017. And hundreds of other influencers came online as well.
For my wild exercise, I choose this brownie. Such a workout.
Don't assume that weight loss is going to benefit your health in any way, because there's no evidence to support that.
Being forced to lose weight for medical reasons is not body positive.
If you are losing weight,
It's just toxic ritualistic reinforcement. We just call it what it is here.
because you want to feel better, be in less pain, be healthier, all of these.
They're worried about it because if you do, then they have to question what they're doing. And they don't want that because, again, they're in a delusion. It's delusional. So how is a delusion maintained? Through constant reinforcement. It's like building a tower. It's like a Jenga tower or something, or a house of cards. You have to really protect the house of cards with everything you got. Because if something happens, like a celebrity loses weight, then it falls. It's very, very, I don't think people realize how much mental bandwidth and work goes into maintaining that delusion. It is wild. I think about it pretty often, how much mental space was wasted for keeping that alive. It is so much work to keep that alive. And I will always point that out. And I've had people comment and be like, oh, come on, it's easy to eat a lot. Da, da, da. Not when you get to the SMO levels. It's hard. It's a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of delusion. It's a lot of like lies. Like, it's a lot. You have to like, and then your mood gets really sour, and you have to like either hold that back, or you have to, or you let it out, and then you have problems with people. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. Like, it is just wild, all the stuff that goes on within that world, and especially being super morbidly obese and toxically ritualistic. It is one hell of a drug. That's all I can tell you. It is a nightmare. And it's a lot of work. So much work.
These things.
But I do understand once you're in all that, it's a lot of work to get out of it too. But you're always working. You're working to maintain that whole thing, or you're working to get out. And it's better to work to get out, obviously, because you're going to be working either way.
That's fatphobic.
They earn through the social media platforms themselves, and some raked in nice sponsorship deals as well. Companies like Lane Bryant and Torrid pay big bucks for sponsoring posts promoting fat acceptance.
True.
And then there's the mainstream media. Sometimes they define culture, but they always cater to it. I showed you one of Cosmopolitan's issues where they put large models on the cover. Some people praise them for being inclusive, while others accuse them of promoting obesity. But what
true.
Cosmo cared about was the buzz. That issue sparked more online engagement than they'd seen in years. Controversy sells. I can pretty much guarantee you that the editors of Sports Illustrated know that these women appeal to a very small minority of their readers. But it got them buzz too, as well as brownie points for being nice, inclusive people. Other fashion and media outlets jumped in as well. Even the fitness industry is cashing in with fat yoga classes popping up. And there's a fat acceptance wellness industry with online babe camps to help you break up with the diet culture. Here's the bottom line. Fat acceptance has a big audience, and it sells. Books, classes, clothes, medical equipment. It's no longer just a movement, it's an industry. And that industry has a vested interest in keeping you feel good about your body, no matter what size it is. But it became more than just about feeling good and eating.
It's not just an industry, it's also a pathology, which is what I try my best to shed light on as well.
What you want. It has a nasty bite as well, and still does. So as fat acceptance grew in the midst of the anti-bullying movement, it tied itself to the concept of civil rights. It's a clever move, psychologically speaking. By framing fatness as an identity, like race or gender, it triggers our...
It's something that happens because the toxic ritualistic frames fatness as an identity. You identify with being fat within the pathology. So it's like if something happens to a fat person, then you think, oh my gosh, that happened to me. But it's because it becomes your number one defining characteristic within the pathology, which it doesn't make any sense. It's not actually a part of identity. I do talk about it on this channel, and I do talk about how to shift your identity from it, but it's because I understand how deep it can go. I literally had an identity crisis over it, over many aspects of the journey in 2023, but it was also physical. That was a very physical experience. But also the mid-sized princess era from this year, divorcing myself from the fat label, it was challenging for me. Even now, it was tough, but you have to do it because you can't identify as that, especially when you're not anymore. And so I tried to, champion the mid-size era, defining yourself as mid, etc., because it's a stepping stone to get out, because otherwise people hold on to it forever. I've seen that a lot too. So again, these are these emotional aspects that do need to be addressed within this issue, and I do my best to do that. But that's why I did that, for example. And it did work for me. It did. Because I view myself as normal now. That's how I view myself. And it worked, you know. So I'm like, okay.
Fight against discrimination. Fat phobia became a phrase, just like homophobia and transphobia. The concept of fat pride was modeled off of gay pride and black pride as well. Words like discrimination and oppression became part of the narrative. And, perhaps not surprisingly, being fat phobic was tied directly to racism. The Scientific American, for instance, a journal that...
It's because it always does that. Like I said, they'll try to underpin everything within the toxic ritualistic. It tries to piss people off, get people talking about it, get people upset about it. Why? Because they want the drama. Why do they want the drama? Because the drama, it makes them feel like they're doing something, especially if they're really, really big. People don't realize how hollow people's lives can get when they're super morbidly obese, so they don't do very much. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that it can be used as a reinforcement mechanism. So if there's controversy around fatness, if there's controversy around eating, then that can be used to reinforce. And if there's shame or shaming, then that can be used to reinforce too. But they will often find shame that doesn't exist or push for shame to be there where it wasn't, because it's not about anything other than the behavior. The 3 behaviors, there's 3 of them. So don't get it twisted. It's not just eating. It's also obsessing over how you look and reduction, or being very reductive, overly reductive. And then the last one is binge. So they want to do one of those 3 things. And if there's controversy, if there's fighting about it, if it is tied to something, to a cultural conversation that people are talking about, then they're going to be able to use it to reinforce, no matter what aspect of reinforcement they're doing, or no matter what behavior of the 3 behaviors they are doing. They will use it to do all of them, any and all of them.
Gets more political by the year, tells us that prescribing weight loss to black women ignores barriers to their health. Okay. Also unsurprisingly, professors backed up this view as well, like this one who wrote a book claiming that the fetish for thinness stemmed from the slave trade and the spread of Protestantism. Now, I read just enough of it to know that it was essentially word salad and not the good kind. But in the era of cancel culture, the fear of being labeled a fat shamer is no joke. Celebrity fitness trainer Jillian Michaels got slammed for questioning why people were celebrating Lizzo's body. Bill Maher, Tyra Banks, Jordan Peterson, Kelly Osbourne, Rihanna, they were all attacked for what were mild criticisms or often warnings not to celebrate obesity. Even when Adele lost some weight, she was accused of betraying the body positive movement. Lizzo as well.
It's all toxic ritualistic. Like, I feel like he's almost there. He's almost seeing it. It's E followed by the letter D. Like, I need to like scream it at him, you know? That's why. Because that's what it's about. It's all about that. It's about the specific person when they are canceling or all this stuff. And it, I think people conflate it with politics, or they conflate it with like social scandal or something, because they use they just copy. They're just a copier. It copies everything, because everything becomes about being fat. And I don't think that people understand how weird that, like, I don't think people within the toxic ritualistic understand how weird that is to people that aren't in it. And I don't think that people that aren't in it understand how central the issue of being fat is within binge. It is the center of a person's complete world. So every single other issue is filtered through being fat. And you see that, one of the best examples of that is through Aubrey Gordon. She will say fatness has to do with misogyny, racism, homophobia, this, that, you know, Protestantism, this, and I mean, everything. I think she made a connection to, I remember I reacted to one of her things. She made fatness connected to almost everything that you can possibly think about. It was crazy. It was like, it was so ridiculous. And I think that is part of why fat acceptance does have a narcissistic reputation, because it's like they only want to talk about being fat. And you see it all the time. They'll throw other issues under the bus. It doesn't matter. That's the number one. That's the biggest issue. That's the most important thing. You know, you'll find your most, people that, for example, they cannot, they're very left wing and they cannot stand Trump or JD Vance, but they will still break from their politics to defend their weight. Because, and I saw that on the Fab Fatties with Allie. She still would put that issue first. And people don't understand it because it sounds crazy. I wonder why it sounds crazy. Because it is. It is a pathology. It is a mental illness. And people don't understand that. And if I say that, people are like, no, there's no way that's true. But look at them. Look at it. It always goes back to that. Everything goes back to that. It's the number one aspect of a toxically ritualistic person's identity. Every time. And especially if you are super morbid, especially. Because then it's severe. So of course.
Well, but it got much more serious when health institutions started softening their language and their medical approach to avoid being attacked. This fear of being labeled fat-phobic has led to some truly baffling situations. In 2019, the UK charity Cancer Research ran a campaign correctly pointing out that obesity is the second biggest preventable cause of cancer after smoking. They were blasted by activists and other academics for fat shaming because they said it gave the impression to obese people that their cancer was their fault. Now, let that sink in. A cancer charity was attacked for trying to prevent cancer. Universities are now offering fat studies courses to interrogate fatness and fat phobia. Some hospitals are removing scales from waiting rooms and only weigh patients who specifically request it. Why?
Do not ever give in to the demands of the toxic ritualistic. Never, never, never. And I try to say this so often, and I do see it happening in the UK like crazy right now. And, I really appreciate, I'm going to shout out to Compulsive Rambler. I appreciate your perspective so much because she's in England. And I appreciate all my British viewers that can tell me about what's happening, because I feel like there is this weird institutional fat acceptance astroturf like thing going on in England or the UK or whatever. Sometimes I get confused because I'm too American. I don't know what the difference is sometimes, but I do. If I really think about it, I do, but I don't know what to say sometimes. I'll just put it to you that way. I don't know which one to say. I'll just say Britain. I'll say British. I'll try to mix it up. The point is, there is a hostile takeover of Britain right now, or the UK. It's really bizarre. And I'm here it's deep, it's entrenched, it's at least 40 years deep in the United States. I think it was probably more fringe in the late 60s and 70s, but since the 80s, it's been pretty fucking powerful here and very, very entrenched. And you can see it through an absolute explosion of obesity in the United States over the past 40 years 40 years. So I was like, what year is it? But yeah, so that's what's going to happen in England. I'm warning you, it's already happening, kind of. Obesity is already really on the rise in England, but it'll get worse. It'll absolutely explode. fat positivity equals weight gain. That's what people need to understand. Fat positivity equals weight gain. Fat positivity equals weight gain. If you are positive about it, you will gain weight. It's just, it is what it is.
To avoid triggering eating disorders or making patients feel uncomfortable. And some doctors feel pressure to avoid
They still do, though. It's like you're reinforcing it, though. You're co-signing it. You're affirming it. So you're making it worse still. It doesn't help the person.
discussing weight with obese and overweight patients altogether. A 2018 study found that only 40% of UK doctors would bring up the topic of weight loss with obese patients. That's not just political correctness. That's medical negligence.
Yes.
Cardiologist Dr. Asim Malhotra.
I completely agree. It's a huge institutional failure, and these are professionals. It's horrible.
About the link between obesity and severe COVID-19 outcomes. He, again, was accused of fat shaming despite presenting peer-reviewed medical evidence. That's when a movement has gone too far. With
it went too far. I think it went too far with the roots of it. It came from the toxic ritualistic. So it doesn't matter. It had bad roots. It was never going to work out.
Actually killing people. And these deaths aren't just theoretical. It's directly hitting the fat influencer world. Brittany Sauer died at age 28. Taylor Lejeune, he was only 33 and died the same month. Kat Paz, New England fat studies professor, died at age 42. And Jamie Lopez, the 500-pound star of Supersize Salon, died at age 37. Now, it's just a hunch, but I suspect that the extremes of this movement have probably reached their peak, and the early deaths of obese people will be part of it.
It could, unless if it resurges. Because it's always there to take on more victims. You know, or it's always there. It just depends on how many people are toxically ritualistic. And that's basically, we'll see what happens, I guess.
You rarely see really obese people in their 70s and beyond because most of them are already dead. At a certain point, reality destroys bad ideas. It reminds me a little of the drug culture, which really took off in the 60s, but was soon killing off the musical icons like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. In the 70s, when I grew up, every time you turned around, another young celebrity was dead from drugs. Yeah. And so by the 80s, the anti-drug backlash, and sponsored by Nancy Reagan and the whole Just Say No campaign, it got under full swing and it turned that around. The longer you live and pay attention, the easier you'll see these pendulums of social change go back and forth. For instance, when I was young, the concept of recycling wasn't a thing at all. Now, at least in my neighborhood, we don't throw anything away without it going into one of the proper many bins. But is that because it's really helpful, or could it actually be more about making us feel good? On YouTube, I started seeing videos that said recycling, especially plastic recycling, was essentially a scam. Well, you should never really trust a YouTuber. So I started researching that, and quite frankly, it made me a little sad. It's a pretty interesting story, and you may want to check it out.
Well, that's just him trying to get more content. I'm not commenting on that. But, yeah, I do think that reality does destroy bad ideas. But also, if somebody cannot grasp reality, then it doesn't matter, if that makes any sense. Like, it will still claim more deaths and stuff. And I'm not that level of nihilistic where I'm like, let's just let it all fall out and happen. I don't agree with that, which I'm not saying that that's what he was saying, but it kind of was giving that a little bit. But I get it. He's not an anti-FA activist, whereas I am. And I'm like, no, like this can change. It can be addressed. We need to culturally shift. We need a cultural shift. But it starts with not affirming this. But remember, when you don't affirm it, come at it from a stoic, logical perspective. But also, you got to understand the emotional quality of the person, and you have to understand that matters. So always separate the person from the ideas. Treat the ideas coldly, logically, non-reactively. When it comes to the person, treat them emotively, empathetically, etc. But don't ever affirm the bullshit. If somebody tells you weight is genetic, say no, it isn't. It has to do with how much you're eating. Just say it. And if they say it again, then say it again. Because they're trying to assert a false reality onto you. And you have to say no. And it doesn't matter if they get pissed. Because at the very least, you can plant a seed. But do not be a part of the problem. Do not be like, I guess you're right. No. And people do that because they're lazy. That's a laziness issue within society too. So I think that there's a lot of stuff of why this comes up. You know, I think there's a lot of like people work really hard and they don't want to deal with it. But us working really hard and not dealing with it has led to it getting to this point. We can't all not deal with it. And so there is kind of like a bystander effect in America in regard to this issue too. So let's change it. Let's do this, you know. And again, I'm going to speak out against this weird trying to take over the UK moment that is going on. Because no. That's why. Because no. So with that, I'm going to go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Emily, so much for suggesting this video. I really, really loved covering this. I will talk to you guys soon. Have a good one. Peace.